The chilling silence in Admiral Karl Donitz's operations room on March the 17th, 1943, wasn't the quiet of anticipation, but the suffocating hush of disbelief. The air, heavy with cigar smoke and the scent of defeat, seemed to cling to the numbers scrawled on the blackboard. Kapitän Leutnant Götz Hessler, his hand trembling slightly, had just updated the grim tally. 17 ships. The Americans had launched 17 ships yesterday, in a single day. Dönitz, architect of Germany's U-boat force and the master strategist of the tonnage war, stared at the charts spread across the table. Intelligence reports, fragments of intercepted radio transmissions, the confessions of captured merchant sailors, they all screamed the same impossible truth. The United States, a nation dismissed as an industrial lightweight, was building ships faster than his elite U-boats could send them to the bottom of the Atlantic. Not just marginally faster, not just impressively faster, but overwhelmingly, crushingly, existentially faster. This wasn't merely a setback. It was the dawning realization of a fundamental, almost cosmic imbalance. The very mathematics of naval warfare, which Dönitz had so meticulously calculated in his war room just a few years prior, had been utterly inverted. He was watching the meticulously constructed edifice of his strategy crumble, not under the weight of superior Allied tactics, but under an avalanche of American steel. It was the moment the German U-boat command understood they weren't fighting a navy. They were fighting a factory. To truly grasp the magnitude of this revelation, we must first rewind to the genesis of Dönitz's vision. In 1939, as Europe teetered on the brink of another devastating war, Dönitz presented his chillingly logical argument to Hitler. His calculations were precise, almost elegant in their simplicity. Britain, an island nation, was utterly dependent on imports for survival. 47 million tons of supplies annually. Cut off these vital arteries, and the British economy would collapse. His solution? A fleet of 300 Type 7 U-boats. With this force, he projected, Germany could sink 1 million tons of shipping per month, and within a year, cripple enough of Britain's merchant marine to force capitulation. The tonnage war was born, a strategy that reduced the complexities of global conflict to a stark equation. Allied ships minus U-boat sinkings equals victory or defeat. To succeed, U-boats merely needed to sink 300,000 gross register tonnage, GRT, per month, a figure believed to be beyond Britain's shipbuilding capacity. For a time, it seemed to work. The early years of the war, particularly from 1940 to 1942, became known among U-boat crews as the happy times. The first happy time saw U-boats ravage convoys in the North Atlantic. But it was the second happy time, an audacious offensive off the American East Coast from January to August 1942, that truly showcased the U-boat's devastating potential. During these months, German submarines sank an astounding 609 ships, totaling over 3.1 million tons. The American coastline, initially unprepared for war, became a hunting ground. Coastal cities, accustomed to peacetime illumination, blazed with lights, silhouetting easy targets for lurking U-boats. Merchant ships sailed independently, often unescorted, making them ripe for the picking. Kapitän Leutnant Reinhard Hartigan, commanding U-123, wrote in his war diary off the coast of New York, "It is a pity there are not 10 U-boats here instead of 1. The hunting is magnificent. The Americans are so careless they have learned nothing from 2 years of war." This sentiment echoed across the U-boat fleet. Oberleutnant Herbert Victor, serving aboard U-230, vividly recalled the intoxicating, almost giddy mathematics of those early months. "We calculated endlessly," he recounted. Each ship averaged 5,000 tons. 6 ships meant 30,000 tons. Our flotilla of 12 boats, each sinking 6 ships per patrol, meant 360,000 tons. With 40 boats operating continuously, we could achieve victory. The arithmetic, from their perspective, was irrefutable. Germany was winning the tonnage war. Britain was teetering on the brink. Victory, they believed, was just a matter of sustained effort. But beneath this surface of perceived dominance, a seismic shift was occurring, thousands of miles away, in the shipyards of a nation that Germany had fundamentally underestimated. The first whispers, the initial tremors of this industrial earthquake, came from unexpected sources. In September 1942, survivors from the torpedoed freighter West Lashaway, picked up by U-66, were interrogated. During these routine questionings, a merchant sailor, an engine room oiler from Baltimore, mentioned almost casually that his ship had been built in just 35 days. Kapitan Lieutenant Friedrich Markworth, commander of U-66, recorded his incredulity in his war diary. The prisoner must be mistaken or lying. No nation can build a 7,000-ton vessel in 35 days. German shipyards require 6 months minimum for such construction. It defied all logic, all known industrial capabilities. Yet, these unsettling reports continued to surface, like persistent ghosts in the U-boat command's carefully constructed reality. Survivors from the Liberty ship William Clark, sunk by U-29 in November 1942, claimed their vessel was one of 60 being built simultaneously at a single shipyard in Richmond, California. The captured second mate insisted he had personally witnessed 3 ships launched in a single week. To the German command, this was simply Allied propaganda, a deliberate attempt to demoralize their submariners. Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of operations, Korvettenkapitän Götz Hessler, reiterated the prevailing dismissal in a staff assessment. The Americans are clearly instructing their merchant crews to exaggerate production figures if captured. Such construction rates are technically impossible. The irony was profound. The truth was not only possible, it was far more staggering than any propaganda could have conceived. It wasn't merely exaggeration. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial potential and ingenuity. Germany, rooted in a highly skilled craft-based industrial tradition, simply couldn't comprehend the scale and methodology of what was unfolding in American shipyards. Their belief was that quality and speed were inversely proportional. The Americans were about to shatter that paradigm. The secret lay not in revolutionary ship design, but in revolutionary production methods. At the heart of this industrial miracle was Henry J. Kaiser, a man who, remarkably, had never built a ship before 1940. Kaiser, an industrialist known for massive construction projects like the Hoover Dam, brought an entirely fresh perspective to shipbuilding. He didn't see ships as individual, custom-built vessels. He saw them as products on an assembly line, much like automobiles. His shipyards, particularly those in Richmond, California, became crucibles of innovation. The key innovation was prefabrication and modular construction. Instead of building a ship piece by piece on a single slipway, Kaiser's yards manufactured massive sections, complete deckhouses, double-bottom units, stern frames, and bow units, separately, often miles from the final assembly point. These enormous components, weighing hundreds of tons, were then transported and welded together like gigantic steel puzzles. This decentralized approach allowed multiple sections of many ships to be built simultaneously, significantly compressing the construction timeline. Crucially, Kaiser also championed welding over traditional riveting. Riveting was a labor-intensive, time-consuming process that required highly skilled craftsmen. Welding, by contrast, could be taught in weeks, not years. This opened up the workforce to a vast pool of previously untapped labor. Women, teenagers, and men who had been deemed unemployable in peacetime. These Rosie the Riveters, though more accurately, Rosie the Welders, became the backbone of America's wartime production, turning out ships at an unprecedented rate. The psychological impact of this inclusion, of ordinary citizens being directly involved in the war effort through their labor, was immense. It transformed the abstract concept of war into a tangible, collective, national endeavor. A dramatic demonstration of this new methodology came on November 12, 1942, with the launch of the SS Robert E. Peary. From the laying of her keel to her ceremonial launch, a mere 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes had passed. This was not a fluke, nor a publicity stunt. It was a calculated, awe-inspiring demonstration of a scalable industrial process. The Germans, with their meticulous, craft-oriented shipbuilding, simply could not fathom such speed. Their shipyards, which took 6 months or more to construct a similar vessel, were effectively artisan workshops compared to Kaiser's industrial factories. German intelligence, through agents in neutral Portugal, eventually managed to obtain American newspapers containing photographs of these shipyards. The images, studied with increasing alarm at U-boat headquarters, confirmed the horrifying truth. Multiple hulls stretched as far as the camera's lens could capture, each in various stages of completion. Cranes, the size of buildings, moved prefabricated sections weighing hundreds of tons with seemingly effortless grace. The photographs showed an industrial ballet. Keels being laid, engines and superstructures being fitted, and completed vessels steaming away from fitting-out docks, all simultaneously, a continuous flow of maritime production. Oberleutnant Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, would later write with stark resignation, "When we saw those photographs, we knew the war was lost. They were not building ships. They were manufacturing them like automobiles." The conceptual difference was profound. Building implied craftsmanship and time. Manufacturing implied mass production and relentless speed. The U-boat crews, once the hunters, were beginning to understand that they were now caught in the crosshairs of an industrial titan. By January 1943, American shipyards were achieving production rates that exceeded the worst nightmares of German naval planners. The statistics, once dismissed as fabrications, were now confirmed through multiple intelligence sources. Each data point a hammer blow to Donitz's strategy. In January 1943, 96 ships were launched, totaling 850,000 tons. February 1943 saw 108 ships launched, accounting for 975,000 tons. By March 1943, the staggering figure of 120 ships totaling 100,000 tons was reached. By 1944, the average time to build a Liberty ship had plummeted to just 42 days, with some experienced yards completing vessels in under 3 weeks, even while simultaneously training new workers. The United States Maritime Commission's emergency shipbuilding program hadn't just maximized existing shipyards. It had created entirely new ones, purpose-built for mass production. The despair began to permeate even the highest ranks of the U-boat command. Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders with 47 ships sunk, captured the crushing reality in a letter to his wife that survived the war. We are told to achieve an impossible target. Yesterday, I learned the Americans built 100,000 tons last month alone. We are not fighting a navy, we are fighting a factory. This was the crux of the German strategic failure. They had prepared for a traditional naval conflict, but found themselves embroiled in a war of industrial might, a contest of sheer output. The full magnitude of American production capacity hit the U-boat force with brutal clarity during the convoy battles of March 1943. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sailing in close proximity across the treacherous North Atlantic, were attacked by a wolf pack of 40 U-boats, the largest such operation of the entire war. In what should have been a devastating tactical victory for the Germans, the U-boats sank 22 ships, totaling 146,000 tons. Dönitz personally announced the success in a special communiqué, declaring it proof that the U-boat remained the decisive weapon. But within days, intelligence reports arrived that spread a chill through the operations room, far colder than the Atlantic wind outside. In the same week, the massive convoy battle raged. The Americans had launched 38 ships. The mathematics were inescapable, brutally simple in their finality. For every ship the Wolfpack sank, the Americans were building 2. The ratio was not just unfavorable, it was catastrophic. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichroth, commanding U-109, articulated the dawning horror in his war diary after returning from this patrol. The ocean is full of new ships. Where we once found half-empty convoys of rusted vessels, we now see endless lines of new construction, fresh paint, modern equipment, and flying American flags. They are overwhelming us with abundance. The psychological impact of seeing seemingly endless streams of new, identical ships was profound. It wasn't just a physical defeat, it was a spiritual one. Even more disturbing than the sheer numbers were reports of new ship types previously unknown to German intelligence. Beyond the standard Liberty ships, utilitarian, slow, but highly effective cargo carriers, American yards were churning out faster victory ships, T-2 tankers, capable of carrying 141,000 barrels of oil, and specialized C-1, C-2, and C-3 cargo vessels. This variety suggested not a desperate, single-minded focus on basic transport, but methodical planning, strategic foresight, and seemingly unlimited resources. It indicated an industrial base so robust it could diversify its output even under immense wartime pressure. The most detailed intelligence about American production capacity often came from the most unwilling sources. German submariners who survived their sunk U-boats and were rescued by Allied vessels. Oberleutnant zur See Hans-Joachim Förster, pulled from the water after U-189, was sunk by British escorts in April 1943. Spent 3 weeks aboard the newly launched Liberty ship James W. Nesmith before reaching port. In his post-war memoir, Förster recalled the experience with a sense of wonder and despair. The ship was so new that instruction manuals were still wrapped in plastic. The crew quarters had amenities we hadn't seen in years: hot showers, electric lighting throughout, refrigerated food storage. The engine room contained more advanced equipment than our newest U-boat. This wasn't a desperate, bare-bones emergency vessel. It was a well-designed, comfortable ship that happened to be built in 5 weeks. The American crew, exuding a confidence born of their nation's industrial might, spoke freely about production statistics, often showing newspaper clippings boasting about Kaiser's Richmond shipyards. The numbers, intended to boost American morale, instead solidified the growing dread in Foerster's mind. In May 1943, German naval intelligence achieved what they considered a major coup, obtaining, through Spanish sources, a complete copy of the United States Maritime Commission's annual report. This document, intended for Congress, laid out American shipbuilding achievements and projections in exhaustive detail. Reading the report at his headquarters, Dönitz reportedly sat in silence for a full hour. The numbers were beyond comprehension. American shipyards had launched 4,115 merchant ships, totaling 36,160,192 tons during the war years, nearly 4 times the pre-war American merchant marine. The report projected that 1944 production would exceed 1943 targets. It revealed that 250,000 individual parts were prefabricated throughout the country, assembled into 250-ton sections, and welded together in about 70 days. One section proudly boasted that American shipyards employed over 700,000 workers, including 200,000 women. German shipyards, by comparison, employed fewer than 80,000 workers total, most of them increasingly reluctant forced laborers. Korvettenkapitän Eberhard Gott, Dönitz's chief of staff, performed the grim calculations. At current production rates, even if U-boats sank every single ship in a large convoy, an impossible feat, the Americans would replace the entire tonnage in 11 days. The tonnage war, as Dönitz had conceived it, was not just unwinnable. It was a strategic delusion. The enemy possessed a self-replenishing, almost hydra-headed fleet. Beyond the sheer numbers, U-boat commanders were increasingly reporting technological advantages in American shipping that made their task even more difficult. New Liberty ships were equipped with advanced navigation equipment, improved damage control systems, and defensive armament that exceeded many destroyer escorts from just 2 years earlier. Kapitänleutnant Herbert Schulze, commanding U-437, noted after a failed attack in June 1943. Target vessel performed evasive maneuvers suggesting radar detection of periscope. New construction Liberty ship demonstrated speed exceeding our intelligence estimates. Defensive armament included radar-directed guns that achieved near misses on our first emergency dive. The technology gap extended to construction methods themselves. While German shipyards still relied heavily on riveting, American yards had perfected welding techniques that not only sped construction but produced stronger hulls. Welding saved steel, reduced construction time by 30%, and could be performed by workers trained in just 2 weeks. German attempts to accelerate their own shipbuilding failed catastrophically. The few cargo vessels Germany managed to build took an average of 8 months to complete. When pressure was applied to speed construction, quality suffered so severely that several ships literally broke apart during trials. This contrast vividly highlighted the difference between industrial innovation driven by necessity and a desperate scramble for output without the foundational industrial and technological base. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Men who had sailed in 1940 and 1941, when single submarines could sink entire convoys, now faced overwhelming opposition. Where once they had been hunters, they were now the hunted. Machinist Johann Müller, a diesel mechanic on U-758, kept an illegal diary that survived the war. His entry for July 1943 reads with raw despair. The old hands speak of when we were winning, when ships burned from horizon to horizon. Now we count ourselves lucky to survive each patrol. We hear the Americans build ships faster than we can reload our torpedo tubes. What is the point of our sacrifice? The statistics tragically backed up this despair. After December 1941, when the U.S. entered the war, the tonnage target for German U-boats effectively doubled to 700,000 GRT per month to maintain the strategic advantage. This target was achieved in only 1 month, November 1942. After May 1943, average sinkings dropped to less than 1/10 of that figure. The hunters had indeed become the hunted, and the mathematics of the tonnage war had reversed with stunning, irreversible finality. U-boat morale, already strained by mounting losses and the relentless pressure of Allied anti-submarine warfare, cracked under the weight of these revelations. Crew members began referring to their submarines as iron coffins, a term that would have resulted in severe punishment just a year earlier, but was now so common that officers often ignored it. This wasn't insubordination. It was a collective acknowledgement of a grim new reality. Faced with irrefutable evidence of American production supremacy, Dönitz attempted desperate measures to maintain the tonnage war, even as he privately acknowledged its futility. In a conference with Hitler on May 31, 1943, he argued for increased U-boat production, requesting a minimum of 40 new submarines per month. Hitler, increasingly detached from reality and caught in his own web of delusion, approved the request but allocated no additional resources, rendering it a meaningless gesture. Dönitz also ordered changes in tactical doctrine. U-boats were instructed to prioritize loaded ships over those in ballast, tankers over dry cargo vessels, and newer construction that would be harder to replace. But these refinements, like shifting deck chairs on a sinking ship, were meaningless against the industrial tsunami of American production. In his war diary entry for June 1943, Dönitz wrote with uncharacteristic emotion, his usual precision giving way to an almost poetic despair. The enemy production figures are confirmed from multiple sources. We face not a fleet, but an industry. Each patrol now costs us submarines we cannot replace, while the enemy launches multiple ships daily. The tonnage war's arithmetic has become our death sentence. This wasn't merely a military assessment. It was an existential lament for a strategy that had run headlong into an unimaginable force. Let's pause here and consider the genius of Henry J. Kaiser. This man, an outsider to the shipbuilding industry, became the unlikely linchpin of Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. His methods, refined from large-scale civil engineering projects, were deceptively simple but revolutionary in their application. German intelligence collected extensive files on Kaiser, trying to understand how one man's methods could single-handedly tip the balance of a global war. Kaiser's innovations went beyond just welding and prefabrication. He instituted 3-shift, continuous operations, transforming shipyards into truly 24/7 factories. His Richmond shipyards alone employed 90,000 workers at peak production. The scale was mind-boggling. Prefabrication meant that while one ship was being assembled, components for 5 others were under construction simultaneously. The yard operated like an automobile factory, with ships moving through assembly stations rather than remaining static on a slipway. Contra-Admiral Werner Fuchs, head of German naval construction, reported to Dönitz with a mixture of awe and horror. Kaiser has industrialized shipbuilding in ways we never imagined. Our yards are artisan workshops. Theirs are factories. We build ships. They manufacture them. The difference is not of degree, but of kind. This insight, delivered by an enemy, was perhaps the clearest articulation of the paradigm shift that had occurred. The Liberty ship itself, often described as ugly, slow, and basic, became a potent symbol of American industrial might that haunted U-boat crews. Based on a simple British design from 1879, these vessels were deliberately utilitarian, stripped of luxuries, but capable of carrying an astounding 10,000 tons of cargo. A single Liberty ship could transport 2,140 jeeps, 440 light tanks, 260 medium tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. What truly terrified German naval planners wasn't the sophistication of these ships, but their sheer numbers and, crucially, their replaceability. When U-515 under Werner Henke sank the Liberty ship Thomas McKean in June 1942, American shipyards launched 3 identical vessels in the same week. The individual ship meant nothing. The production system meant everything. Captured German naval officers were often shown American propaganda films featuring Liberty ship construction. One film, which showed the complete assembly of a vessel in time-lapse photography, reduced a group of veteran U-boat officers to stunned silence. Kapitän-Leutnant Hans Jenisch later recalled, "We watched them build an entire ship in what seemed like minutes. The film was propaganda, yes, but the ships were real. We saw them every day through our periscopes. New paint, new flags, heading for Britain." The propaganda served not to deceive, but to reveal an undeniable, terrifying truth. American mass production methods created unexpected advantages beyond mere numbers. Standardization meant that repair parts were interchangeable between hundreds of vessels. A damaged Liberty ship could be repaired quickly in any Allied port with readily available standard components. German vessels, often custom-built or modified, required specific parts that might take months to manufacture, if they could be produced at all under Allied bombing. The production system also enabled rapid technological advancement. When U-boats began achieving success with acoustic torpedoes in late 1943, the Americans retrofitted hundreds of Liberty ships with noise-making devices and acoustic countermeasures in a matter of weeks. German attempts to counter Allied radar, by contrast, took years to implement across their smaller, more dispersed U-boat fleet. Oberleutnant Heinz Schäfer, who would later command U-977 on its famous surrender voyage to Argentina, observed, "The Americans learned from every sinking, and their corrections were implemented across hundreds of ships simultaneously. We learned too, but our lessons were applied to individual boats slowly, painfully. They were fighting an industrial war. We were fighting an artisanal one." By autumn 1943, the mathematics of defeat were undeniable and brutally clear. Intelligence reports confirmed that American shipyards had achieved a production rate of over 1.5 million tons per month. The United States and Canada, working in concert, began building ships faster than they could be sunk in September 1942. When 713,245 tons of new merchant shipping was delivered, while 500,181 tons was lost. The gap had only widened since, becoming an unbridgeable chasm. At a conference of U-boat flotilla commanders in October 1943, Dönitz presented the figures that sealed their fate. On a blackboard in the operations room, he wrote 3 columns, each starker than the last. Ships sunk, October 1943. 29 vessels, 156,000 tons. Ships built, October 1943. 140 vessels, 1/200,000 tons. Net enemy. Gain. 111 vessels, 1,44,000 tons. The room fell silent, the collective dread palpable. Finally, Korvettenkapitan Werner Winter, commander of the First Flotilla, broke the silence, his voice heavy with resignation. Herr Admiral, at these rates, even if we sink nothing, the enemy gains strength. We are not slowing their growth, merely providing their shipyards with practice. Dönitz's response, recorded by his aide, was revealing of a man trapped by duty and a crumbling strategy. Gentlemen, we continue not because we can win the tonnage war, but because our duty demands it. Each ship sunk, however briefly, delays supplies to our enemies. We have lost the mathematics, but not our honor. It was a desperate plea for stoicism in the face of an inevitable and mathematically confirmed defeat. For ordinary U-boat crew members, the revelation of American production capacity came not through chilling statistics in a war room, but through accumulated, visceral observations. Bootsmat Wilhelm Hoffmann, a torpedo mechanic on U-604, kept a secret diary that captured this gradual, heartbreaking realization. March 1942. Sank old Greek steamer. Rust bucket held together with paint. These are the ships starving England. September 1942. New American freighter in convoy. Fresh paint. Modern lines. Where did this come from? March 1943. Every ship in convoy appears new, identical profiles, like they're stamping them from molds. July 1943. Oberbootsman says Americans build 3 ships for every one we sink. If true, why do we sail? October 1943. Witnessed 17 ships in convoy, all flying American flags, all new construction. We managed to damage one. What is the point? The entries paint a picture of hope slowly eroding, replaced by bewilderment, then despair. The enemy was no longer individual ships to be hunted, but an unstoppable, anonymous force of industrial output. German efforts to understand and counter American shipbuilding capacity led to an intensive, if ultimately futile, intelligence operation. Agents in neutral countries purchased American newspapers and magazines, voraciously consuming every scrap of information. Technical journals were smuggled through Spain and Sweden. Every captured merchant sailor was intensively interrogated about shipyard locations, construction methods, and production rates. The intelligence, however, only painted an ever more daunting picture. Beyond the ubiquitous Liberty ships, Americans were building Victory ships, faster and more sophisticated than the basic Liberties. T-2 tankers, crucial for fuel supply, capable of carrying 141,000 barrels of oil. C-2 and C-3 cargo vessels, specialized for specific routes and cargoes, showcasing advanced logistical planning. Whoa, hundreds of escort carriers and destroyer escorts. Small aircraft carriers and anti-submarine warships, essential for convoy protection, were also being mass-produced. Lieutenant Ernst Klee, a naval intelligence officer, compiled a comprehensive report in December 1943 that concluded with a stark, terrifying assessment. American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our entire pre-war estimate of their total industrial potential. They are building more ships annually than existed in the entire world merchant fleet in 1939. This was not just a military disadvantage, it was a fundamental miscalculation of an entire nation's potential. Germany had gone to war underestimating its adversaries, not only in military might, but in the very fabric of their economic and industrial resilience. After Germany's surrender, captured U-boat commanders provided extensive testimony about their recognition of American industrial supremacy. Their accounts, preserved in Allied interrogation records, reveal the psychological journey from initial confidence through profound doubt to utter despair. Korvettenkapitan Fritz Julius Lemp, who had commanded U-30 at the war's start, stated simply, "In 1940, we believed 20 U-boats could strangle Britain. By 1943, we had 200 operational boats and were losing the Atlantic. The Americans didn't defeat our submarines. They buried them under an avalanche of steel." Kapitan Lieutenant Heinrich Müller Erzberg, captured when U-590 was sunk in July 1943, was more specific. "I attended a briefing where we were shown American production figures. The staff officer presenting them actually apologized, saying he knew they seemed impossible, but they were confirmed by multiple sources. I thought of those numbers every time I raised my periscope and saw another convoy of new ships. The sight of new, seemingly endless ships became a psychological torment, a constant reminder of the insurmountable odds. The ultimate statistics of the tonnage war revealed the totality of German defeat. By the end of the war, although the U-boat arm had sunk 6,000 ships totaling 21 million GRT, the Allies had built over 38 million tons of new shipping. The net gain of 17 million tons meant the Allies ended the war with a larger merchant fleet than they had possessed at its start. For Dönitz and his staff, these numbers represented not just military defeat, but a profound conceptual failure. The tonnage war theory had assumed finite resources and limited production capacity. It had never accounted for an enemy capable of transforming their entire industrial base into a shipbuilding machine with unparalleled speed and scale. In his final war diary entry before Germany's surrender, Dönitz wrote with brutal honesty, "We fought the last war with weapons designed for the next to last war. The Americans fought with factories. In the end, their Liberty ships proved mightier than our U-boats, not because they were better ships, but because there were always more of them. We sank ships. They built fleets." This chilling admission highlights a core truth about modern warfare. Technological superiority and tactical brilliance can be utterly negated by overwhelming industrial capacity. In August 1945, while imprisoned at Mondorf-les-Bains, Dönitz had extensive conversations with other captured German leaders. In a recorded conversation with Generalfeldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, Dönitz made a remarkable admission. "I knew by spring of 1943 that the tonnage war was lost. The Americans were building ships at rates that defied not just our capabilities, but our comprehension. I had asked my staff to calculate how long it would take Germany to build 2,700 cargo ships. The answer was 150 years at our maximum production rate. The Americans did it in 4 years while simultaneously building the world's largest navy and air force." When Keitel, stunned by this revelation, asked why he had continued sending U-boats on increasingly suicidal missions, Dönitz's answer revealed the tragic trap of his own making. What else could we do? Admit that our entire naval strategy was fantasy, that we had challenged an industrial giant with what amounted to naval guerrilla warfare. We continued because stopping would have meant acknowledging that we never had a chance. Ironically, American shipbuilders were often unaware of their profound psychological impact on the U-boat force. Workers at Kaiser's shipyards, interviewed after the war, expressed surprise that their relentless efforts had so demoralized the enemy. Margaret Rosie Thompson, a welder at Richmond Shipyard No. 2, recalled, "We were just doing our jobs, trying to beat the other shift's production record. We'd paint slogans on the hulls like, 'Built by America's Women,' or 'From Richmond to Hitler with Love.' We had no idea U-boat commanders were reading those slogans through their periscopes and losing hope." Henry Kaiser himself, in a 1946 interview, admitted he hadn't fully grasped the strategic impact of his production methods. "I was thinking about efficiency, about cost per ton, about worker safety," he said. "I didn't realize until after the war that we had essentially automated victory. The Germans could never match our industrial mathematics. Every Liberty ship was proof that democracy and free enterprise could outproduce tyranny." The numbers tell the final story with brutal clarity. German U-boat force: 162 U-boats commissioned, 777 U-boats lost, a staggering 67% loss rate, 30,000 submariners killed, a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any service branch in any nation during World War II. 779 Allied ships sunk. American shipbuilding: wartime emergency program. 2,710 Liberty ships built. 534 Victory ships built. 500 plus other cargo vessels built. Total: over 5,000 ships constructed. At peak production, American shipyards produced the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage of the world in just 3 years. The mathematics that Dönitz had so carefully calculated in 1939 had been not just defeated, but obliterated. Post-war interviews with surviving U-boat commanders revealed how deeply the recognition of American industrial capacity had affected them. Many admitted that by mid-1943 they knew the war was lost, not because of military defeats, but because of production statistics. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, one of the most decorated U-boat commanders, stated at a veterans reunion in 1975, "We were magnificent warriors, defeated by accountants and factory workers. Every torpedo we fired cost the Reich the equivalent of building 5 houses. Every Liberty ship the Americans built cost them less than our torpedoes. We were fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons against the wrong enemy." The psychological impact extended far beyond the war itself. Many veterans struggled for decades to comprehend how completely they had misunderstood American capabilities. Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, the highly decorated commander of U-96, immortalized in Das Boot, later worked in merchant shipping and witnessed Liberty ships still operating efficiently in the 1960s. He observed, "Ships, we were told, were emergency trash, barely seaworthy, outlasted our finest U-boats by decades. It was the final insult. Their throwaway ships were better than our best submarines." In February 1943, a remarkable document was circulated among U-boat flotilla commanders, authored by an anonymous staff officer, later identified as Korvettenkapitän Hans Rudolf Rosing. It presented a mathematical analysis that proved prophetic. Current American production: 1 million tons monthly and increasing. Current sinking rate: 400,000 tons monthly and decreasing. Net Allied gain: 600,000 tons monthly. Conclusion: At these rates, by December 1943, Allies will have replaced all losses since 1939. By December 1944, Allied merchant fleet will exceed pre-war tonnage by 100%. By December 1945, Allies will possess twice the world's 1939 merchant capacity. The tonnage war is not being lost. It is already lost. Mathematics do not lie. The document was suppressed by Dönitz's headquarters, but copies survived. Every prediction proved conservative. The Allies actually exceeded these projections. Kapitän-Leutnant Peter Kremer, nicknamed Ali, commander of U-333, provided perhaps the most eloquent summary of the U-boat force's recognition of American industrial might in his post-war memoir. We had been told America was a mongrel nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood cowboys incapable of serious warfare. Then we learned they were building ships faster than we could count them, let alone sink them. Each Liberty ship was a 7,000-ton testimony to our leaders' delusions. I remember the exact moment I knew we had lost. It was March 1943. I had just sunk a freighter, a clean kill, when my watch officer called me to the periscope. On the horizon, he had spotted another convoy. 40 ships, all new, all American-built, all heading for Britain. I had 2 torpedoes left. 2 torpedoes against 40 ships. That was the mathematics of our defeat. We were U-boat men, elite warriors of the Kriegsmarine. We thought courage and skill would triumph over numbers. But you cannot torpedo a production statistic. You cannot sink an assembly line with valor. The Americans had weaponized their entire industrial base, and we were hunting their output with submarines. It was like attacking a thunderstorm with a sword. Heroic, perhaps, but ultimately futile. At the Nuremberg trials, Dönitz was questioned extensively about his continuation of the U-boat war, despite knowing about American production supremacy. His answer, recorded in the trial transcripts, remains one of the most revealing admissions of the war. By early 1943, I knew from intelligence reports that the Americans were building approximately 140 ships monthly, while we were sinking fewer than 40. Simple arithmetic showed we were losing the tonnage war by a factor of 3.1, and the ratio was worsening each month. But what alternative did we have? Surrender the Atlantic without a fight? Allow the Allies to build their invasion fleets unmolested? We continued not because we could win, but because we could force the enemy to devote resources to convoy protection, to building yet more ships, to maintaining the vast anti-submarine apparatus. The tragedy was not that we lost the tonnage war. That was inevitable once America entered the conflict. The tragedy was that we ever believed we could win it. We challenged the world's greatest industrial power to a production contest. The result was preordained. By war's end, the statistics were so overwhelming that many U-boat veterans initially refused to believe them. At a prisoner-of-war camp in Louisiana, captured U-boat officers were shown a film about American shipbuilding. The film claimed that at its peak, the American shipbuilding machine could produce the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage in just 3 years. Kapitän-Leutnant Johann Mohr stood up and declared it propaganda. Impossible. A lie. The American camp commander responded by arranging a tour of the Houston ship channel. The German officers were shown dozens of Liberty ships under construction, thousands of workers welding and assembling, and complete vessels sliding down the ways daily. Mohr later wrote, "We stood there, 30 U-boat officers, watching them build more tonnage in a morning than our best patrol had ever sunk. Some men wept, others laughed, the bitter laugh of men who finally understand a terrible joke. We had been trying to drain the ocean while the Americans were refilling it with a fire hose. The story of German U-boat commanders realizing America built ships faster than they could sink them is more than a tale of industrial triumph. It represents a watershed moment in the history of warfare, a transformation from individual tactical skill to overwhelming production capacity, from the daring heroism of a few to the systemic output of an entire nation. Korvettenkapitän Reinhard Suren, who had commanded U-564 with distinction, provided perhaps the most prescient analysis in a 1960 interview. We learned too late that in modern war, courage and skill matter less than conveyor belts and welding torches. The Americans didn't defeat our U-boats with better ships or superior tactics. They defeated us with superior mathematics. They understood that war had become an equation, and they simply produced more solutions than we could generate problems. The psychological journey of U-boat commanders, from confidence through disbelief to despair, mirrors the broader German military experience. They had prepared for tactical warfare and encountered industrial warfare. They had trained to fight ships and found themselves fighting factories. Decades after the war, German naval officers still struggled with the magnitude of American industrial achievement. At a 1985 reunion of U-boat veterans in Kiel, the keynote speaker, former Korvettenkapitän Erich Topp, addressed the assembled survivors. "Gentlemen, we were the finest submarine force ever assembled. Our training was superb. Our boats were excellent. Our tactics were revolutionary. We sank millions of tons of shipping and came close to starving Britain. But we were defeated by something we never understood and could never counter: the American ability to turn their entire nation into a weapon. Every American housewife who bought war bonds, every teenager who worked a shipyard shift, every farmer who grew food for industrial workers, they were all weapons in a war we didn't know how to fight. We sank their ships. They built more. We sank those. They built even more. It wasn't a battle. It was an avalanche. Let us honor our fallen comrades, not by pretending we could have won, but by acknowledging the truth. We were warriors from an old world, fighting an enemy who had invented a new one. They didn't defeat us with better submarines or superior seamanship. They defeated us with liberty ships, ugly, slow, mass-produced symbols of a democracy that could transform its entire society into an arsenal. That is the lesson we must pass on. In modern war, the factory floor is as important as the battlefield, the production line as crucial as the front line. We learned this through our periscopes, watching endless convoys of new American ships steaming toward horizons we could no longer reach. The war's end brought final tallies that confirmed what U-boat commanders had realized by 1943. Germany needed to sink 700,000 tons monthly to win the tonnage war after the U.S. entered, but achieved this only once, in November 1942. By contrast, American shipyards were producing over 1.5 million tons monthly by 1943. The human cost of this mathematical defeat was staggering. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any service branch in any nation during the World War II. They had fought magnificently for a strategy that mathematics had doomed from the start. Admiral Karl Dönitz, writing in his memoirs years after the war, provided the epitaph for the tonnage war. We calculated that sinking sufficient tonnage monthly would defeat Britain. We didn't calculate that America could build 2 million tons monthly. That was not a miscalculation. It was a failure of imagination. We could not imagine such industrial power because we had never seen it. By the time we could see it through our periscopes and in our intelligence reports, it was too late. The war was over. We simply continued fighting for 2 more years before admitting it. Today, only 2 operational Liberty ships remain from the 2010 build: the SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, both preserved as memorial ships. They stand as monuments not to naval architecture, but to industrial achievement, reminders of when America transformed itself into what President Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. For the German U-boat force, these ships represent something else entirely: the physical manifestation of mathematical defeat. Every rivet, every weld, every ton of cargo capacity was a number in an equation they could never balance. They had gone to war believing in the superiority of German engineering, the excellence of their training, the inevitability of their victory. They discovered instead that wars could be won in shipyards, that victory could be welded together by workers who had never seen the ocean. The story of U-boat commanders realizing America built ships faster than they could sink them is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare itself. It marks the moment when industrial capacity became more important than military skill, when production lines became more decisive than front lines, when the ability to build became more powerful than the ability to destroy. In the end, the German U-boat force was not defeated by superior Allied naval forces, better tactics, or more courageous sailors. They were defeated by 2,110 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945. Each one a 7,000-ton proof that in modern warfare, mathematics matters more than martial prowess, and the nation that can build the most, the fastest, will ultimately prevail. The U-boat commanders who survived the war carried this knowledge with them for the rest of their lives. The terrible understanding that they had been magnificent warriors in the wrong kind of war, fighting with submarines against spreadsheets, attacking with torpedoes an enemy armed with assembly lines. They had sought to win a tonnage war, and discovered too late that their enemy had redefined what tonnage meant. Their story stands as a warning and a lesson. In the age of industrial warfare, courage and skill remain important, but they are no match for overwhelming productive capacity. The U-boats of the Kriegsmarine were among the finest weapons ever created, manned by some of the bravest and most skilled warriors in history. But they were ultimately defeated by something as mundane as production statistics, as unglamorous as welding torches, as simple as the ability to build ships faster than they could be sunk. That is the final lesson of the tonnage war. In modern conflict, victory belongs not to the brave, but to the productive. Not to the skilled, but to the systematic. Not to those who can destroy, but to those who can build. The German U-boat commanders learned this lesson through their periscopes, watching endless streams of new American ships sailing past. Each one a mathematical proof of their inevitable defeat.